Here lies one of the most confounding truths of human experience. The more we claim to know with certainty about the complex art of living together, the more disastrously we tend to fail. I have spent decades observing this curious phenomenon, how the brightest minds, armed with the most sophisticated theories and comprehensive plans, consistently produce results that would embarrass a village idiot guided by nothing more than common sense and inherited wisdom. This is not an accident, nor is it a temporary failure of method. It represents something fundamental about the nature of human knowledge and the peculiar character of political activity. The rationalist, confident in his abstract principles, marches boldly toward his perfectly designed destination, only to discover he has been walking in circles. Meanwhile, the practitioner who admits his ignorance, who proceeds with the hesitant steps of accumulated experience, somehow arrives where he needs to be. Today we explore this paradox, why intellectual humility proves more reliable than theoretical certainty, why the acknowledgement of our limitations becomes the foundation of genuine wisdom, and why, in the intricate dance of human affairs, knowing less about everything often means understanding more about what actually matters. The implications reach far beyond academic curiosity. They touch the very heart of how we ought to live, learn, and govern ourselves. Chapter 1: The Scholar's Trap, When Knowledge Becomes Ignorance. The modern academy presents us with a peculiar spectacle, individuals who have mastered vast bodies of theoretical knowledge yet remain helplessly incompetent when confronted with the simplest practical tasks. I recall observing colleagues who could discourse brilliantly on the principles of democratic governance yet were utterly baffled by the actual conduct of a faculty meeting. This is not mere absent-mindedness, it reveals something profound about the relationship between different modes of knowing. Technical knowledge, what I call knowledge of technique, operates by reducing complexity to manageable formulas. It promises certainty through method, predictability through procedure. The economist reduces human behavior to mathematical models. The political scientist transforms the subtle art of statecraft into statistical correlations. The educational theorist converts the mysterious process of learning into standardized metrics. Each claims to have captured the essence of their domain in a comprehensive system. Yet observe what happens when these experts attempt to apply their knowledge to actual situations. The economist's models collapse when confronted with real markets driven by human sentiment and historical circumstance. The political scientist's predictions fail because politics involves the unpredictable collision of personalities, traditions, and unforeseen events. The educational theorist's methods produce students who can pass tests but cannot think. The trap lies in mistaking the map for the territory. Technical knowledge provides useful abstractions, simplified representations of reality that allow us to handle certain limited aspects of experience. But the practitioner who forgets that his knowledge is abstraction, who begins to believe that his formulas capture the full reality of human experience, becomes dangerous both to himself and others. Consider the difference between a master chef and a food scientist. The scientist understands the molecular structure of proteins, the precise temperatures required for chemical reactions, the optimal ratios of ingredients. Yet place him in a kitchen during dinner rush, and he will likely produce inedible disasters while following his formulas perfectly. The master chef, who may know nothing of molecular gastronomy, creates magnificent meals through a knowledge that cannot be fully articulated, an intuitive understanding developed through years of practice, failure, and gradual refinement. This practical knowledge operates through what I call intimations, subtle cues and half-conscious recognitions that guide skilled activity. It cannot be reduced to explicit rules because it encompasses far more variables than any systematic knowledge can capture. The experienced teacher recognizes when a student is confused not through diagnostic criteria but through countless small signals that resist specification. The seasoned politician senses the mood of a crowd through indicators too complex for any manual to codify. Chapter 2: The Rationalist's Burden, Why Certainty Weighs Us Down. The rationalist approaches human affairs carrying an enormous burden, the conviction that he must understand everything before he can act wisely. He believes that proper conduct requires a comprehensive theory, that good decisions demand systematic knowledge of all relevant factors. This burden, which he assumes will make him more effective, actually renders him less capable of dealing with the fluid, ambiguous nature of human experience. Watch the rationalist in action. Before making any significant decision, he must construct elaborate theoretical frameworks. He gathers data, analyzes variables, projects outcomes. He seeks to eliminate uncertainty through comprehensive planning. The result is paralysis disguised as thoroughness. By the time he has finished his analysis, the situation has changed. His perfect plan addresses circumstances that no longer exist. Meanwhile, the practitioner who acknowledges his ignorance moves with surprising effectiveness. He knows he cannot predict all consequences or control all variables. Instead of seeking impossible certainty, he develops sensitivity to immediate circumstances. He acts on partial information, adjusts as he proceeds, learns from each step. His ignorance liberates him to respond to reality as it unfolds rather than forcing reality to conform to his preconceptions. This is not anti-intellectualism, it is recognizing the proper place of different kinds of understanding. The practitioner is not less intelligent than the theorist, he is intelligent in a different way. His knowledge is embedded in activity rather than extracted from it. He knows more about his particular domain precisely because he claims to know less about the general principles that supposedly govern all domains. Consider the difference between a theoretically trained driver and one who learned through practice. The first can explain the physics of acceleration, the engineering principles of steering systems, the optimal gear ratios for different conditions. Yet on a winding mountain road in heavy rain, the experienced driver who just feels the car's responses will navigate safely while the theoretical expert calculates himself into a ditch. The burden of comprehensive knowledge creates several specific disabilities. First, it generates inflexibility, the need to stick to the plan even when circumstances suggest adaptation. Second, it produces overconfidence, the belief that thorough analysis guarantees good outcomes. Third, it encourages abstraction, the tendency to deal with simplified models rather than complex realities. Most destructively, the rationalist's burden makes him impatient with the gradual, experimental approach that characterizes genuine learning. He wants to leap directly from ignorance to mastery without passing through the intermediate stages of confusion, error, and partial understanding that actual skill development requires. He seeks shortcuts to wisdom that bypass the messy process of experience. The practitioner who travels light, unburdened by the need for theoretical completeness, proves more capable of genuine learning. His acknowledged ignorance keeps him alert to new information, open to correction, ready to modify his approach based on results rather than defending his system against contrary evidence. Chapter 3: The Art of Not Knowing. Practical wisdom in action. True mastery in any human endeavor reveals a curious characteristic. The most skillful practitioners often cannot fully explain how they achieve their results. They have learned to navigate complexity through what appears to be sophisticated ignorance, a refined awareness of what they do not and cannot know, combined with exquisite sensitivity to what they can perceive and influence in immediate circumstances. Watch a master craftsman at work. The experienced carpenter does not calculate the precise angle for each joint or measure every cut to mathematical precision. Instead, he has developed an eye for proportion, a feel for the wood, an intuitive understanding of how different pieces will fit together. His knowledge is embodied in his hands, his eyes, his sense of balance and rhythm. Ask him to articulate the principles he follows, and he will struggle to provide adequate explanations. Yet his work displays a coherence and elegance that no amount of theoretical instruction could produce. This practical mastery operates through what I call conversational knowledge, an ongoing dialogue between the practitioner and his materials, his circumstances, his emerging understanding. The master chef tastes, adjusts, tastes again. The skilled teacher reads the faces of students, modifies the lesson in real time, responds to questions that reveal unexpected confusions. The experienced parent navigates the daily negotiations of family life through countless small adaptations that resist systematic codification. Such practitioners have learned to work with uncertainty rather than against it. They understand that human situations are too complex for comprehensive prediction, too fluid for rigid planning. Instead of seeking to eliminate ambiguity, they develop comfort with provisional understanding, tentative conclusions, flexible responses. Their ignorance becomes a form of wisdom because it keeps them attuned to the unexpected, the novel, the emergent. Consider how this applies to political activity. The skilled politician operates through practical wisdom rather than ideological certainty. He senses the mood of his constituents, recognizes when compromise is possible, understands the difference between what can be said publicly and what must be negotiated privately. His effectiveness depends not on having a complete theory of governance but on possessing an educated feel for the art of the possible. This mode of knowledge requires intellectual humility, the recognition that our understanding is always partial, our predictions uncertain, our control limited. But this humility proves liberating rather than constraining. Free from the burden of impossible knowledge, the practitioner can focus on what he can actually perceive and influence. He learns to read situations rather than imposing predetermined categories upon them. The art of not knowing involves several specific capacities. First, the ability to tolerate ambiguity without rushing to premature closure. Second, sensitivity to the particular rather than exclusive reliance on the general. Third, willingness to proceed on partial information while remaining open to correction. Fourth, recognition that understanding emerges through engagement rather than preceding it. This approach requires patience with the gradual character of genuine learning. The practitioner accepts that mastery develops slowly, through accumulated experience rather than sudden revelation. He values questions that open new possibilities over answers that close off inquiry. His ignorance becomes productive because it maintains space for discovery, growth, and adaptation. Chapter 4: The University's False Promise: How Education Breeds Incompetence. Modern universities present themselves as institutions that transform ignorance into knowledge, uncertainty into expertise. They promise to equip students with the tools necessary for effective action in the world. Yet observe the graduates they produce, individuals stuffed with information yet curiously helpless when confronted with practical challenges, armed with theories yet unable to exercise elementary judgment, trained in methods yet lacking wisdom about when and how to apply them. This educational failure stems from a fundamental confusion about the nature of learning itself. Universities increasingly operate on what I call the technical model of education, the belief that genuine knowledge consists of explicit information that can be systematically transmitted from instructor to student. According to this model, learning occurs when students acquire and can reproduce correct answers to well-defined problems. But consider what this approach actually produces. Students learn to identify the techniques appropriate to standardized situations, but they cannot recognize which technique applies when confronted with novel circumstances. They master abstract principles but cannot navigate the particular complexities that make each real situation unique. They become fluent in the language of their disciplines yet remain unable to speak meaningfully to anyone outside their specialized domains. The technical model treats education as if it were industrial production, raw materials, ignorant students, processed through standardized procedures, curricula, to produce uniform outputs, certified graduates. This mechanistic approach fundamentally misunderstands how human beings actually learn to think and act effectively in the world. True education operates more like an apprenticeship than a factory. The student learns by participating in ongoing conversations with those who have already acquired some measure of practical wisdom. Knowledge is transmitted not primarily through explicit instruction but through imitation, practice, and gradual initiation into ways of thinking and acting that cannot be reduced to formulas. Consider the difference between learning to write by studying grammar rules versus learning through extensive reading and practice under guidance from experienced writers. The first approach produces students who can parse sentences correctly but cannot construct coherent paragraphs. The second develops writers who may struggle to explain exactly why certain phrases work better than others but who can create prose that actually communicates with readers. The university's false promise becomes particularly destructive when applied to moral and political education. Students are taught that ethical reasoning consists of applying abstract principles to concrete cases, that political problems can be solved through the proper application of theoretical frameworks. They graduate convinced that their academic credentials qualify them to reshape society according to rational plans. These graduates become what I call barbarians with degrees, individuals who possess technical competence within narrow specializations but lack the broader practical wisdom necessary for responsible citizenship. They know how to manipulate systems but not how to preserve the delicate cultural achievements that make civilized life possible. They can innovate efficiently but cannot distinguish between changes that enhance human flourishing and those that diminish it. The remedy requires recovering what I call liberal learning, education that aims not at technical competence but at the development of judgment, taste, and practical wisdom. Liberal learning introduces students to the great conversation of human civilization, the ongoing dialogue between past and present about how we ought to live together. It cultivates not expertise but thoughtfulness, not certainty but the capacity for discriminating judgment. Such education acknowledges that the most important human capacities cannot be directly taught but must be acquired through participation in practices that embody them. Students learn to think by engaging with the thinking of others, to judge by exercising judgment under guidance, to act wisely by observing and imitating those who have achieved some measure of practical wisdom. Chapter 5: The Practitioner's Advantage: Why Experience Trumps Expertise. In every domain of human activity, we encounter the same curious phenomenon. Those who have learned their craft through years of practice consistently outperform those who approach it armed primarily with theoretical knowledge. The experienced nurse makes better clinical decisions than the fresh medical school graduate despite knowing less about biochemistry. The seasoned teacher creates more effective learning environments than the holder of advanced degrees in educational theory despite being unable to cite the latest research. The veteran entrepreneur identifies promising opportunities that escape the notice of MBA analysts despite lacking sophisticated frameworks for market evaluation. This advantage of experience over expertise reflects fundamental differences in how knowledge operates in practice versus in theory. The expert possesses what we might call thin knowledge, precise, explicit, systematically organized information about his domain. The practitioner has developed thick knowledge, a rich, contextual understanding that includes not only what typically works but also when it works, under what circumstances it fails, and how to adapt when standard approaches prove inadequate. Consider the difference between a cookbook recipe and a grandmother's cooking. The recipe provides explicit instructions that, if followed precisely, should produce acceptable results. But the experienced cook knows how to adjust for differences in altitude, humidity, and ingredient quality. She recognizes when the dough feels right, regardless of exact measurements. She can salvage dishes that go wrong in unexpected ways. Her knowledge encompasses not just the basic procedures but the countless variations, exceptions, and adaptations that real cooking requires. This practical knowledge accumulates through what I call conversational learning, an ongoing dialogue between the practitioner and his domain. Each situation teaches something new, each mistake provides information for future adjustment, Each success reinforces effective approaches while revealing their limitations. The practitioner learns to read subtle cues that indicate when standard procedures need modification. Expertise, by contrast, tends toward rigidity. Having invested considerable effort in mastering systematic knowledge, the expert naturally seeks to apply his frameworks as widely as possible. He looks for situations that conform to his models rather than adapting his approaches to fit particular circumstances. When reality fails to match his expectations, he tends to blame the situation rather than questioning his method. The practitioner's advantage becomes most apparent in complex, dynamic situations where multiple variables interact in unpredictable ways. The theoretical expert attempts to analyze all relevant factors before acting, often becoming paralyzed by the impossibility of comprehensive understanding. The experienced practitioner acts on partial information, learns from immediate results, and adjusts his approach based on emerging evidence. This does not mean that systematic knowledge is useless, only that it provides tools rather than wisdom about how to use them. The most effective practitioners typically combine extensive experience with selective use of theoretical insights. They know which concepts illuminate their particular challenges and which represent academic abstractions with little practical relevance. The practitioner's humility about the limits of his knowledge paradoxically makes him more reliable than the expert who claims comprehensive understanding. Because he expects uncertainty and prepares for unexpected complications, he remains adaptable when circumstances change. Because he knows that his knowledge is partial and provisional, he stays alert to new information that might require adjusting his approach. This suggests that in domains involving human complexity, politics, education, therapy, management, we should trust experienced practitioners over theoretical experts, especially when they disagree about what approach will prove most effective in particular circumstances. Chapter 6, The Planner's Conceit, How Comprehensive Knowledge Breeds Disaster. No spectacle in modern life proves more consistently entertaining and terrifying than watching intellectuals armed with comprehensive theories attempt to solve complex social problems. Their confidence in systematic knowledge leads them to propose sweeping reforms that promise to eliminate inefficiencies, correct injustices, and optimize outcomes according to rational principles. The results invariably demonstrate the devastating gap between theoretical elegance and practical effectiveness. Consider the history of urban planning. Rational reformers, convinced they understood the principles of optimal city design, demolished functioning neighborhoods to construct housing projects based on the latest architectural theories. These projects, designed by experts who knew precisely how people should live, quickly became monuments to social pathology. The organic communities they replaced had evolved gradually through countless small adaptations to local circumstances. They may have appeared chaotic to the systematic mind, but they actually embodied a practical wisdom that no amount of theoretical analysis could capture or reproduce. The planner's conceit operates through what I call the synoptic delusion, the belief that complex social systems can be comprehensively understood and rationally redesigned. This delusion rests on several false assumptions. First, that social phenomena can be reduced to manageable variables that respond predictably to planned interventions. Second, that the planner can acquire sufficient knowledge to anticipate all relevant consequences of proposed changes. Third, that existing arrangements, having developed without central direction, must be inferior to systems designed according to rational principles. Each assumption proves systematically wrong. Social systems involve countless interdependent relationships that resist comprehensive analysis. Human beings respond to planned interventions in ways that planners cannot anticipate because people adapt their behavior to new circumstances, often defeating the original purpose of the intervention. Most fundamentally, existing arrangements typically embody practical wisdom accumulated through generations of trial and error, wisdom that planners discard at their peril. The planner's knowledge appears comprehensive because it operates at a high level of abstraction. He can analyze demographic trends, economic indicators, and social statistics. He can construct models that show how rational agents should behave under specified conditions. But this abstract knowledge systematically excludes the particular, local, contextual information that makes social systems actually function. Consider how this applies to educational reform. Planners identify problems in school performance and propose systematic solutions, new curricula, revised testing protocols, restructured administrative arrangements. These reforms reflect sophisticated understanding of learning theory, institutional design, and performance measurement. Yet they consistently fail to produce intended improvements because they ignore the countless informal relationships, unwritten understandings, and practical adaptations that make actual schools work. The most destructive aspect of the planner's conceit is its impatience with gradual, experimental approaches to social change. Because planners possess comprehensive theories, they see no need for tentative, partial reforms that allow for learning and adjustment. They prefer dramatic transformations that implement their vision completely rather than modest modifications that preserve what works while addressing specific problems. This impatience reflects a deeper misunderstanding about how social systems actually improve. Beneficial change typically occurs through what I call intimations, subtle recognitions of how existing practices might be modified to address emerging challenges while preserving their essential character. Such change requires intimate familiarity with particular circumstances, sensitivity to unintended consequences, and willingness to proceed gradually based on accumulated evidence. The practitioner who acknowledges his ignorance proves more capable of beneficial reform than the planner who claims comprehensive knowledge. The practitioner understands that his knowledge is partial and his control limited. He proceeds cautiously, pays attention to actual results rather than intended outcomes, and adjusts his approach based on experience rather than defending his theory against contrary evidence. Chapter 7: Living with Uncertainty, the Conservative Art of Practical Wisdom. The deepest insight of conservative philosophy lies not in resistance to change but in recognition of how beneficial change actually occurs. While radicals seek transformation through comprehensive planning and progressives pursue improvement through systematic reform, conservatives understand that the most enduring and beneficial changes emerge from what I call the conversation of mankind, the ongoing dialogue between inherited wisdom and contemporary challenges that produces gradual adaptations preserving essential continuity while addressing new circumstances. This conservative approach to change requires comfort with uncertainty that radicals and progressives typically find intolerable. Rather than claiming to know what society should become, conservatives acknowledge that we cannot predict the full consequences of social changes or control their ultimate direction. Instead of pursuing predetermined goals through systematic planning, we learn to navigate by attending to immediate circumstances while remaining sensitive to the fragile achievements that make civilized life possible. Consider how this applies to American political challenges. Our constitutional system embodies practical wisdom accumulated through centuries of experience with the problems of self-government. This system may appear inefficient to rational reformers who prefer streamlined decision-making processes. It may frustrate progressives who want rapid responses to social problems. But its apparent inefficiencies actually serve essential purposes, forcing deliberation, requiring consensus, preventing hasty actions that might damage delicate institutional relationships. The conservative art involves learning to work with and through existing institutions rather than attempting to replace them with rationally designed alternatives. This requires what I call institutional sensitivity, awareness of how formal structures depend on informal understandings, written rules rely on unwritten conventions, and official procedures work only within contexts of shared assumptions that resist explicit articulation. Such sensitivity develops through practical engagement rather than theoretical analysis. The experienced legislator understands how bills actually become laws not through studying flowcharts but through participating in the complex negotiations, informal consultations, and strategic accommodations that make formal procedures meaningful. The seasoned judge knows how legal principles apply in particular cases not through mastering abstract doctrine but through years of wrestling with the gap between general rules and specific circumstances. This practical wisdom operates through intellectual humility, recognition that our understanding is always partial, our predictions uncertain, our control limited. But this humility proves liberating rather than constraining. Free from the burden of comprehensive planning, we can focus on what we can actually perceive and influence. Free from the pressure to achieve perfect solutions, we can pursue incremental improvements that enhance human flourishing without risking catastrophic disruption. The conservative approach requires patience with the gradual character of beneficial change. Rather than expecting dramatic transformations, we learn to value small improvements that accumulate over time. Rather than seeking systematic solutions to complex problems, we develop capacity for ongoing adaptation that preserves what works while addressing what doesn't. This suggests a different model of political activity, not the application of theoretical principles to social problems but the cultivation of practical judgment that can navigate the tension between continuity and change. Such judgment cannot be reduced to formulas or taught through systematic instruction. It develops through participation in the practices it seeks to preserve and improve. The ultimate paradox of practical wisdom is that acknowledging our ignorance makes us more capable of effective action. By accepting the limits of human knowledge and control, we become better equipped to work skillfully within those limits. By embracing uncertainty as the normal condition of human affairs, we develop resilience and adaptability that comprehensive planning cannot provide. Conclusion. The great paradox we have explored reveals itself as no paradox at all, but as one of the fundamental truths about human existence, that our greatest achievements emerge not from the arrogant pursuit of comprehensive knowledge but from the humble cultivation of practical wisdom. Those who acknowledge the limits of human understanding prove more capable of beneficial action than those who claim systematic mastery of complex realities. This insight has profound implications for how we approach education, politics, and the art of living together. Instead of seeking impossible certainty, we must learn to navigate skillfully within the bounds of our actual capabilities. Instead of demanding comprehensive solutions, we must develop comfort with provisional understanding and incremental improvement. Instead of imposing theoretical frameworks upon resistant realities, we must cultivate sensitivity to the particular circumstances that make each situation unique. The practitioner's advantage over the expert, the conversation of tradition over the rationalist's plan, the gradual adaptation over the revolutionary transformation, these represent not failures of ambition but recognitions of how human beings actually learn, adapt, and flourish. In a world increasingly dominated by the false promises of technical expertise, we need the ancient wisdom that knows the difference between knowledge and understanding, between information and judgment, between cleverness and wisdom. The path forward requires intellectual courage, the courage to admit ignorance in an age of claimed expertise, to value questions over answers, to proceed tentatively when others demand certainty. It requires recovering respect for the practical wisdom embedded in inherited traditions while remaining open to the intimations that suggest how those traditions might adapt to meet contemporary challenges. Most of all, it requires humility about the human condition, acceptance that knowing less often means understanding more.